My parents told my sister to take my new house because I don't have a family and children. Bethany had always been the afterthought in her family. It wasn't always obvious, but looking back, the signs were there from the start. Her younger sister, Haley, burst into the world like a supernova, all golden curls and dimpled smiles. From day one, she had their parents wrapped around her little finger. Bethany, on the other hand, was the quiet one, more interested in her chemistry set than in making friends. She still remembered her 10th birthday. She'd been hoping for a new microscope, dropping hints for weeks. Instead, she got a frilly dress that made her look like a cupcake. "But Mom, I hate dresses," she protested. "Nonsense, you'll look just like Haley," her mother beamed, completely missing the point. As they grew older, the divide only widened. Haley breezed through school on charm and good looks, while Bethany buried herself in books and science experiments. "Did you hear Haley's been nominated for prom queen?" her mother gushed over dinner one night. "That's great," Bethany mumbled, trying to muster some enthusiasm. I won first place in the science fair today." "Oh, that's nice, dear," her father said absently, already turning back to Haley. "So, Princess, have you picked out your dress yet?" And so it went, year after year. Bethany's achievements, no matter how significant, were always overshadowed by Haley's latest triumph, no matter how trivial. The state science fair in her senior year was Bethany's moment to shine. She'd spent months perfecting her project on sustainable biofuels. When they announced the winners, she could hardly believe her ears. "First place goes to Bethany Whitaker." She was ecstatic. Finally, something even her parents couldn't ignore, or so she thought. "That's great, honey," her mother said distractedly when Bethany told her the news. "But we can't make it to the award ceremony. Haley has a dance recital that day, and you know how important that is to her." Bethany watched them fuss over Haley's costume and makeup, her trophy gathering dust on a shelf. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one she was getting used to. Then the acceptance letters started rolling in. Bethany could barely contain her excitement. A full scholarship to a prestigious university. It was more than she dared to hope for. Mom, Dad, I got in." She burst into the living room, waving the letter. "Full ride and everything." Her mother glanced up from her magazine. "That's nice, dear. Haley, didn't you say you needed help picking out a prom dress?" Just like that, her big moment was brushed aside again. "But it's a full scholarship." Bethany tried again, her voice smaller this time. Her father patted her shoulder absently. "Good job, kiddo. Haley, Princess, let's go shopping. Can't have you showing up to prom in just anything, can we?" Bethany watched them pile into the car, her acceptance letter crumpled in her fist. It was a familiar feeling, but it still stung. Despite the lack of fanfare from her family, she packed her bags and headed off to college with high hopes for the first time. She was free from Haley's shadow, free to be just Bethany. College was a revelation. Suddenly, her passion for science wasn't weird or nerdy. It was respected, even admired. She threw herself into her studies with renewed vigor, determined to make the most of this opportunity. Meanwhile, Haley followed the path her parents had always dreamed of. She enrolled in the local community college, more interested in parties than classes. "College is so hard," she whined during one of their rare phone calls. "I don't know how you do it, Bethany." Bethany bit back the urge to point out that maybe if she spent less time partying and more time studying, she might find it easier. Instead, she just mumbled some vague encouragement and changed the subject. It was during her sophomore year that Haley dropped her bombshell. "I'm engaged," she squealed over the phone. "Garrett proposed last night. Isn't it romantic?" Garrett, her high school sweetheart, the guy who'd once asked Bethany if science was like really hard and stuff. "That's great, Haley," Bethany managed, trying to inject some enthusiasm into her voice. "Have you set a date?" "We're thinking right after graduation," she gushed. "Oh, Bethany, it's going to be perfect. You'll be my maid of honor, won't you?" The wedding was exactly as you'd expect. Haley was radiant, Garrett looked uncomfortable in his tux, and Bethany stood there in her frilly pink nightmare, pasting on a smile for the photos. "Isn't this perfect?" her mother whispered to her during the reception. "This is what every mother dreams of for her daughter." Bethany wanted to ask if she'd ever dreamed anything for her, but she held her tongue. It was Haley's day, after all. As Bethany threw herself into her studies, and later her career, Haley's life seemed to follow a script straight out of her parents' dreams. Within a year of her wedding, she announced her first pregnancy. "I'm going to be a grandmother," her mother squealed over the phone. "Oh, Bethany, isn't it wonderful?" Bethany murmured her congratulations, trying to ignore the implicit question in her voice. "When are you going to settle down, Bethany? When will you give us grandchildren?" Sophie arrived 9 months later, a bundle of pink blankets and loud cries. Bethany flew home for the weekend, dutifully cooing over her new niece, and enduring the not-so-subtle hints from her parents. "You know, Bethany," her father said, bouncing Sophie on his knee, "you're not getting any younger. Don't you want this for yourself?" Bethany gritted her teeth. "I'm focused on my career right now, Dad." Her mother clucked her tongue. "Career is all well and good, dear, but family is what really matters." Bethany bit back a retort about how they'd never seemed to care much about her career before. Instead, she plastered on a smile and changed the subject. 2 years later, Aiden joined the family. Once again, Bethany played the role of the doting aunt, all while fielding questions about her own lack of family. Meanwhile, she was making strides in her career as a biotechnologist. Long hours and hard work paid off, and by 30, she was a senior researcher. Her parents' response to this news? A distracted "that's nice, dear," as they cooed over new pictures of Sophie and Aiden. It was around this time that Bethany decided to buy a house. She'd saved carefully, living frugally while her colleagues splurged on expensive cars and vacations. When she finally found the perfect place, a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood, she was over the moon. "Mom, Dad, I bought a house," she announced during their next phone call. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A house?" her mother repeated. "You bought yourself a house." "Yes, all by myself," Bethany said, her excitement deflating a little. "It's a great investment, but it's such a big house for one person," her mother interrupted. "What will you do with all that space?" Bethany sighed. "I'll enjoy it, Mom. It's mine." "Well," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't approve, "I suppose if that's what you want." "Oh, did I tell you Sophie lost her first tooth yesterday?" And just like that, they were back to talking about Haley and her kids. The months following Bethany's house purchase were a whirlwind of work and settling into her new home. She threw herself into decorating, turning each room into a reflection of her personality. It was during this time that she started to feel a shift in her family dynamics. The usual calls from her parents became less frequent, and when they did call, there was an odd tension in their voices. One evening, she received a call from her mother. "Bethany, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "we're having a family dinner next week. You'll be there, won't you? We need to talk." Bethany agreed, her suspicions raised. In her family, "we need to talk" usually meant trouble was brewing. The night of the dinner arrived, and Bethany pulled up to her parents' house with a sense of foreboding. Haley's car was already in the driveway, and she could hear the excited shrieks of Sophie and Aiden from inside. Dinner was a tense affair. Her parents kept exchanging glances, and Haley seemed unusually quiet. Garrett, Haley's husband, kept clearing his throat, as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. Finally, as they were finishing dessert, her father cleared his throat. "Bethany, we need to talk about something important." Here it comes, Bethany thought. "What's up, Dad?" He glanced at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, you see, sweetie," he said, "we've been thinking that big house of yours, it's really too much for just one person." Bethany felt her hackles rise. "Dad, we've been over this. I like my house. It's mine." "Yes, but," he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Her mother jumped in. What your father is trying to say is that Haley and her family need more space. The kids are growing, and their apartment is getting cramped. Bethany looked at Haley, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. Okay, and her mother continued, her voice sickly sweet, since you're single and have no children, you should give your house to Haley and her family. Just give them the keys and move out. For a moment, Bethany was speechless. She looked around the table, waiting for someone to yell gotcha and reveal it was all a joke. But all she saw were expectant faces. You can't be serious, she finally managed. Now, Bethany, her mother said, her tone patronizing, don't be selfish. Haley needs her own space more than you do. Selfish? Bethany repeated, her voice rising. How is it selfish to want to keep the house I worked hard for and paid for myself? It's your sisterly duty to help in times of need, her father chimed in. Bethany turned to Haley, who was still avoiding her gaze. And what do you have to say about this? Haley shrugged, finally meeting Bethany's eyes. Well, it would be nice to have more space for the kids. Bethany couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her own family asking her to give up her home, acting like she was the unreasonable one for refusing. No, she said firmly, standing up. Absolutely not. I'm not giving up my house. As she grabbed her coat and headed for the door, she heard her father call out, think about it, Bethany. Family should come first. The days following that disastrous family dinner were a blur of disbelief and anger. Bethany kept replaying the conversation in her head, unable to believe her family's audacity. How could they even think to ask such a thing? Her phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from her parents and Haley, but she ignored them all. On the third day, as she was trying to focus on work, her phone lit up with a call from a number she didn't recognize. Figuring it wasn't family, she answered, "Hello, is this Bethany?" A woman's voice came through, sounding disapproving. "Yes, who's this?" "This is your Aunt Lydia. I can't believe what I'm hearing about you, young lady. Your poor sister needs a home for her children, and you're living all alone in that big house. Shame on you." Bethany felt her blood pressure rising. "Aunt Lydia, it's not my day," she continued, not letting Bethany get a word in. "Family helped family. We didn't hoard our resources like misers. I'm not hoarding anything." Bethany snapped. "It's my house. I bought it with my own money." "Well," she huffed, "if you're not going to use all that space, you should at least consider donating your eggs. It's not like you're using them anyway." Bethany was so shocked she nearly dropped the phone. "Excuse me? You heard me," she said primly. "You're not getting any younger, you know." Tick-tock. Bethany hung up without another word, her hand shaking with anger. How dare she? How dare any of them? But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Bethany was bombarded with calls and messages from relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. Each one had an opinion on what she should do with her house and her life. Her great-aunt Myra left a voicemail. "Bethany, dear, it's your great-aunt Myra. I just wanted to say it's not too late to find a nice man and settle down. Then you need that big house." It was relentless. Every ping of her phone brought a new judgment, a new guilt trip. Bethany felt like she was going crazy. She started to dread checking her phone, wincing every time it buzzed. She threw herself into work, staying late at the lab just to avoid going home to more messages. It was during one of these late nights at work that Bethany got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad cold, but enough that her boss insisted she take a few days off to recover. So there she was, curled up on her couch with a box of tissues, feeling miserable both physically and emotionally. Her phone had been mercifully quiet for a few hours, and she was just starting to relax when she heard it, a noise at her front door, like someone was fumbling with the lock. Her heart started racing. Was someone trying to break in? She got up as quietly as she could, creeping towards the door. Through the window, she could see figures on her porch, familiar figures. She yanked the door open, startling the people on the other side. "What the hell are you doing there?" Caught red-handed were her parents and Haley. They looked like deer caught in headlights. frozen in the act of trying to break into her home. Her mother was the first to recover. "Bethany, dear, we were just worried about you. You haven't been answering your phone. So you decided to break into my house?" Bethany couldn't keep the incredulity out of her voice. Her father, at least, had the decency to look embarrassed. "We didn't think you'd be home. We thought you'd be at work. And that makes it okay." Bethany was practically shouting now. "What were you planning to do? Move Haley in while I was gone?" Haley, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Bethany, you're being hysterical. We were just going to wait for you to come home." Bethany noticed for the first time that there was a car parked behind them, loaded with boxes and furniture. Her blood ran cold as she realized the full extent of their plan. "You were going to move in," she said, her voice flat. "You were actually going to move into my house without my permission?" "Now, Bethany," her mother started, her voice taking on that patronizing tone Bethany knew so well. "We've discussed this. Haley needs the space more than you do. We thought if we just took the initiative." "You thought wrong." Bethany cut her off. "This is my house, mine. I bought it with my own money I earned through hard work. You have no right to it." Just then, as they were leaving, "You'll end up old and alone." Bethany slammed the door shut, sliding down to sit on the floor, her back against it. Tears started to flow freely now, a mix of anger, hurt, and relief. Her phone had fallen silent. No more calls from distant relatives, no more guilt-tripping messages. It was as if she'd been excommunicated from the family. Part of her was relieved, but another part ached for the connection, dysfunctional as it had been. It was in this tumultuous state that Bethany received an unexpected message. It was from her Aunt Beverly, her mother's sister. They hadn't spoken in years, not since she had a falling out with Bethany's mom over some old family drama. "I'll meet you tomorrow at Cafe Blue at 4:00 p.m. Intrigued and desperate for any ally, Bethany agreed to meet her. The next day, Bethany found herself sitting across from Aunt Beverly in a cozy corner of Cafe Blue. She looked older than Bethany remembered, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Bethany," she began, reaching across the table to squeeze Bethany's hand. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Your mother called me, trying to get me on her side, but there's more to this story than you know. That's why I asked you to meet me." Bethany's curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Aunt Beverly took a deep breath. "Your parents and Haley, they're in serious financial trouble. Haley and Garrett have been living beyond their means for years. Luxury cars, designer clothes, lavish vacations, all on credit." Bethany shook her head in disbelief. "But why? How?" "It's worse than that," Aunt Beverly continued. "Garrett has a gambling problem, a bad one. He's been secretly draining their accounts for years." The pieces started to fall into place. The desperate attempt to get Bethany's house, the constant pressure. "But what about Mom and Dad?" Bethany asked. Aunt Beverly's face grew grim. "They lost a significant amount of money in a pyramid scheme a few years back. They've been barely keeping their heads above water. They were planning to move in with Haley and Garrett as soon as they got your house." Bethany sat back, stunned. "How do you know all this?" "I work at the bank where they all have accounts," Aunt Beverly explained. "I noticed some suspicious activity and started digging. When I confronted your mother about it, she cut me out of the family." Bethany's mind was reeling. All this time, while she'd been working hard and saving, her family had been digging themselves into a hole, and they tried to drag her down with them. "Bethany," Aunt Beverly said gently, "I know this is a lot to take in, but I think it's time we did something about this situation. If you're willing, I have an idea." Armed with the information Aunt Beverly had shared, they decided to dig deeper. They hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Elena, who came highly recommended. For weeks, they waited anxiously as Elena worked her magic. Finally, she called them in for a meeting. What she revealed left them speechless. Garrett, Haley's husband, had been leading a double life. He was involved in an affair with none other than Bethany's cousin Tessa, Uncle Grant's daughter. He's been funneling money to her for months, Elena explained, showing them bank statements and hotel receipts. Expensive gifts, weekend getaways, you name it. But where did he get the money? Bethany asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Elena's face grew grim. From his gambling wins and from your parents. Aunt Beverly and Bethany exchanged shocked glances. The betrayal ran deeper than they'd imagined. They decided to host a family gathering at Bethany's house. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very house they had tried to take from her would be the stage for their undoing. The day of the gathering arrived. Bethany watched as her family members trickled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and smugness. They probably thought she was going to cave to their demands. Once everyone was seated, Bethany stood up, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. "I've called you all here today because there are some things you need to know," she began. She laid out everything, the financial troubles, the gambling, the affair. With each revelation, she watched the color drain from their faces. Haley jumped up, tears streaming down her face. "It's not true," she screamed, before collapsing into sobs. "Garrett, tell them it's not true." But Garrett was already halfway to the door. Uncle Grant, his face contorted with rage, caught him by the collar. "You son of a," he growled. Bethany's parents sat in stunned silence, the reality of their exposed financial ruin seemingly more devastating than the fact that they had tried to steal her house. The relatives who had judged Bethany so harshly began to stammer out apologies. "We had no idea," Aunt Lydia muttered. "Bethany, we're so sorry." As the chaos unfolded around her, Bethany felt a strange sense of calm. The truth was out. The lies and manipulations were exposed. In the weeks that followed, their family was turned upside down. Haley, unable to forgive Garrett's infidelity, filed for divorce. With nowhere else to go, she and the kids moved back in with Bethany's parents. But their reprieve was short-lived. The bank foreclosed on their house. They were forced to downsize to a small rented apartment, all 5 of them crammed into a space smaller than Bethany's living room. As for Bethany, she watched it all unfold from a distance. After much soul-searching and several tearful nights, she made the difficult decision to sever all ties with her immediate family. "You're doing the right thing, Bethany," Aunt Beverly assured her one afternoon over coffee. "It's not easy, but it's necessary for your mental health and well-being." Aunt Beverly had become Bethany's rock, the family she chose when her blood relatives had let her down. Their weekly coffee dates became a cornerstone of Bethany's new life. As the weeks turned into months, Bethany found herself settling into a new routine without the constant drama and demands of her family. She had time to focus on herself, but with that came a startling realization: she was lonely. "You know, Bethany," Aunt Beverly said one day, "there's a world out there beyond work and home. Why don't you try something new?" With her encouragement, Bethany decided to join a local rock climbing group. It was far outside her comfort zone, but as she strapped on the harness for the first time, she felt a thrill of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. That's where she met Cole. He was belaying another climber, his strong hands confidently handling the rope, when he turned and flashed her a warm smile. Bethany felt her heart skip a beat. "First time?" he asked, noticing her nervous fidgeting with the equipment. "Is it that obvious?" Bethany laughed. They struck up a conversation, and she was immediately drawn to his kind eyes and easygoing nature. As they talked, she learned he was a wildlife photographer with a passion for capturing the beauty of nature. For the first time in years, Bethany felt a spark of excitement about the possibility of a relationship. Cole was kind, adventurous, and understood the complexities of family dynamics in a way few others could. They began dating, their shared love for nature and understanding of complex family dynamics bringing them closer. Before she knew it, they were discussing marriage, a concept that once seemed foreign and unattainable to her. Through it all, Aunt Beverly remained Bethany's steadfast support. She became the mother figure Bethany had always yearned for but never had. She said to Bethany one day, her eyes misty, "I want you to know something. I've changed my will. I'm leaving everything to you." As Bethany hugged her, tears streaming down her face, she marveled at how much her life had changed. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led her to where she was meant to be. With Aunt Beverly's love, Cole's support, and her newfound strength, Bethany was ready to embrace whatever the future held. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe for more awesome stories like this. Stay blessed and healthy. Thank you for watching and see you in the next story.